Welcome to Becoming Virtuosa, the podcast with Dr. Susan Crockett. You are listening to episode number 1, Let the Becoming Begin. This episode is dedicated to my dear old virtual friend in Chipit, because she was there at the beginning.
Welcome to Becoming Virtuosa, where women learn to love their lives. Do you find yourself frustrated by society's expectations? Looking for practical advice on how to discover your talents and level up your life? You found the right place. Here's your host, U.S. News top doctor, robotic surgeon, and certified life coach, Dr. Susan Crockett.
Hello, my virtuosas, and those of you soon to become virtuosas. I'm your host, Dr. Susan Crockett, and I am so grateful for the opportunity to talk with y'all like this. And also, y'all, can we just be real here for a minute? I am so far out of my comfort zone. For me, this is my version of daring greatly, but this has got to happen. So I'm recording this podcast on a beautiful Texas Hill Country Sunday morning with my little dog Ollie snuggled behind me on the chair like he usually is. One thing that I think y'all could really do to help me is to think of me as Sue rather than Dr. Crockett. So credentials are important for setting the stage for authority and all, and if you're actually seeing me in my office as a patient or I'm doing surgery on you, well, then you can call me Dr. Crockett. But here on the podcast, this is Girl Talk. Please think of me as Sue. So I've wanted to do this podcast for a really long time, about 10 years as a matter of fact, before we even knew that podcasting was a thing. So I got a funny story for y'all. About a couple weeks ago, I was flipping through my Facebook posts from about 10 years ago. Y'all remember Facebook back when there was still MySpace and we were doing the status updates that were kind of more like, Sue is feeling blah, blah, blah today or whatever it was? Well, this was my Facebook post from January 4th, 2010. Sue is wondering, if you were given a microphone to speak to the world, what would you say? And then the next day I posted, Sue is explaining the point to yesterday's question. You have been given a microphone. You have the world as a stage. It's called the internet. Unlimited publishing ability. Now, what will you do with it this year? So y'all, I didn't do much with it that year. I was talking about blogging and posting on Facebook and starting to connect with people on a broader platform. But it has literally taken me 10 years to get to the point where I am sitting behind a literal microphone talking to y'all, and I'm so excited and so nervous about being here. So I'm grateful for y'all listening in. I got a couple goals for this first episode. First of all, I want to explain to you what a virtuosa is and the importance of wanting to practice becoming one. I also want to tell you a little bit about my story and how I ended up here, and then we'll talk about what this podcast is and what it isn't. And last, I'll give you a practical tool that you can start using today to begin moving out of those stuck places that we sometimes get to in our lives. I'll give you a tool that will encourage you as you start transforming your life to the next level, to a life that you truly love. Because I've been there. I've been stuck in a place or a situation in my life many times where I really didn't want to be. And I've learned how to get unstuck, to create a life I truly love. And now I want to share this wisdom with you. This podcast is my gift to you. So, what is a virtuosa and why would you want to become one anyway? The short answer to that is virtuosa means a woman of excellence. It's the feminized version of the word virtuoso. So the dictionary defines a virtuoso as one who excels in the technique of an art, especially, or a highly skilled musical performer, or as an experimenter or investigator, especially in the arts and sciences, like a savant, or one who's skilled in or having a taste for the fine arts, or a person who has great skill at some endeavor, like it could be a computer virtuoso. So my story goes back to when I was a kid. I was a musician first, and I played the piano. I begged my mom when I was about 4 years old to let me play the piano. We had one in our house, and finally she gave me lessons, and I took lessons for about 14 years, and I picked up the oboe on the way and became skilled at that, played oboe and English horn through my college career. I got to a point in my career where I had to choose between my two loves. I was called to be a doctor. I loved science in school. I knew from the time I was in middle school probably that I wanted to be a surgeon. So I had these two great loves going into college, music and medicine. And I decided that if I pursued medicine, I could carry the music alongside. But if I went into music, I would lose the medicine. So I ended up going into college and practicing medicine, but brought the music along with me. So The interesting thing was, as my surgical career progressed, I got introduced to robotic surgery in about 2008. So I ended up becoming an OBGYN, really loved surgery. And then robotics came along, and it was like the intersection of technology and what I was born to do. It was like, bam, that was what I was meant to do. And I was in a really great practice at that time that was a general OBGYN practice. And as I adopted robotics and focused on that, it became really apparent that that didn't fit with the rest of the group. They really wanted everybody to practice general OBGYN, the whole gamut. And I came to a point where I was stuck because I needed to pare down on the obstetrics in order to focus more on the surgical side so that I could continue to progress like my other colleagues who were doing robotic surgery. So we went back and forth with my practice for actually a couple of years trying to figure out how to make this fit and work, and it just didn't. So I ended up leaving my group in 2014, and I founded my own medical practice called Virtuosa GYN. And I called it Virtuosa GYN because I really like the idea of surgery being similar to the art of learning music. And the skills that we obtain and the way we practice as surgeons are very similar to the way a musician learns a skill and becomes a virtuoso. So when I named my practice Virtuosa GYN, I got a lot of pushback from people, kind of like, who does she think she is? And where does she get off calling herself, this expert or whatever? But what they didn't understand is that I was doing something called visioning for myself. I didn't really think I was one at that point, a virtuosa. It was what I wanted to become. And I was creating in my mind the goal for what and who I wanted to be. I heard a recent podcast that Oprah did on Super Soul podcast, and she was interviewing Lady Gaga. And Gaga was talking about this exact same thing, where when she named herself Gaga, she visioned for herself what she wanted to be and who she wanted to become. And then she became that as she believed that she was that. So reaching or attaining that perfection of virtuosa isn't something that I plan on even actually fully achieving. That would be perfection. It's kind of like infinity, like it's an abstract concept you never quite reach. But the point is the journey, the becoming. So I founded my practice in 2014, and I had the goal that I would go from doing about 50 robotic surgeries a year to 250 surgeries a year. And I went through a really hard startup, and we'll talk about those in later episodes maybe. But the point is, now I am at a place 6 years later where the practice has fully matured. And in this past year, I hit that goal. I actually did 259 robotic surgeries. I've done over 1,250 total, and I now do about 450 surgeries a year. So I've dropped back the obstetrics, I've dropped back the primary care, and I'm living into that visioning of being a surgical expert, a minimally invasive GYN surgery expert. And here's what I want you to hear about this. I believe that every woman is a virtuosa in her own right. So you may not be a doctor or a musician, or maybe you are, but maybe you're a teacher or a stay-at-home mom, or maybe you're a CEO or a cleaning lady, or maybe you write copyright, I don't know. But the practice of becoming a virtuosa in your own life is the practice of wholeheartedly pursuing your life with your individual gifts and your talents to the best of your ability. And that's the whole purpose of this podcast, is to encourage you along that path. Becoming a virtuosa is the practice of continually being transformed by the renewing of your mind. It is the process of growing more and more connected to the world around you, the people you know and love, and your authentic self. It requires being open with courage and vulnerability in order to connect with others and to overcome those voices of shame in our head that say, who does she think she is? And you can't possibly do that. And you might make a mistake, so you better not enter that arena. Y'all know the arena, right? This quote made famous by Brene Brown, that's actually a quote from Theodore Roosevelt. It is not the critic who counts, not the man who points out how the strong man stumbles or where the doer of deeds could have done them better. The credit belongs to the man who is actually in their arena, whose face is marred by dust and sweat and blood, who strives valiantly, who errs, who comes short again and again, because there is no effort without error and shortcoming, but who does actually strive to do the deeds, who knows great enthusiasms, the great devotions, who spends himself in a worthy cause, who at the best knows in the end the triumph of high achievement, and who at the worst, if he fails, at least fails while daring greatly, so that his place shall never be with those cold and timid souls who neither know victory nor defeat. This is the why for this podcast. This is what I've listened to in my head for the past 10 years. This is why this podcast is my next transformation on the way to becoming my best version of myself, my Virtuosa. Because if I can do it, so can you. The purpose of this podcast is to encourage you, to lift you up, and help you imagine what is possible in your own life, to be an example to you of what is possible. What would your own life look like if you were the Virtuosa in your own life? This podcast is not medical advice. I am a physician, and I may even be your physician, but what I offer here is teaching and wisdom, the same education that my patients may hear from me in my office, but listening to this podcast does not constitute a physician-patient relationship with me. I encourage that if you need it, to seek medical help with your own doctor. This podcast is also not a place where we come to compare ourselves to each other or to beat ourselves down with thoughts about not reaching a goal or a standard. You are your own measuring stick. Only you can be the very best version of you. You don't need to be me. You don't need to be anybody else. This podcast is about teaching you to become the best version of yourself. Also, this podcast is open to everyone. This is a safe place. It's an international audience. I was sitting at Christmas dinner with my stepson recently, and I was telling my family about the podcast and launching it, and he frequently takes mission trips with his mom to Kenya, and they work with women there, and he asked me if this podcast is something that would be helpful to those women there, and I was kind of taken back because I really hadn't considered an audience outside of like my own sphere of influence, like here. And then I thought about it and I thought, well, of course, what a great opportunity. So you are welcome, whether you live in the United States or anywhere else in the world. You're also welcome, whether you are a woman or a man. My target audience is specifically female, but that doesn't mean that men can't gain a lot from what I'm teaching and talking about. And I really have no judgment about your gender or how you choose to look at yourself. If you are gay, straight, trans, bi, whatever you want to call yourself, you are welcome here, and this is a safe place for you. It's welcome for people who are young and old, of all faiths and religions, all cultures and races. Traditional pronouns will be used he and she and they, but that's just because that's my experience. Feel free to insert your pronouns wherever you please. And there are some times when I will talk about God because that's my background and my understanding. But this is not a religious type of podcast. This is a place where we're going to talk about wisdom of multiple sources. But anyway, I'm going to speak about it sometimes in terms of what I understand. But you can insert for God, you can insert creator or the universe or your higher self or whatever you want. All faiths are welcome, and wisdom is not something that's cornered by the Christian market. So let's get on to the little tool that I was going to give you. This is actually a very, very powerful tool. And we are taught to be continually transformed by the renewing of our minds. That is exactly what this transformation tool is that I'm going to teach you today. It's free, and it is mainly to teach you about ladder and bridge thoughts or bridging thoughts that help you to get from old thought patterns to new thought patterns. So the transformation tool has 7 parts to it. And I'm going to kind of go through those parts. I'm going to show you how I use them in preparing for this podcast and also show you how you can use these in your own life. You can get started today. In fact, if you go to virtuosacoaching.com/transformation, there is a PDF downloadable version that you can download for free. And you can start using this worksheet to help transform your own life. So the first step is to identify your current situation or problem. And often we think about this as where we are stuck. Like we feel like our circumstances maybe are controlling what we're doing or where we are. We're not really happy. Kind of like when I was in the practice where I had reached a point that I kind of outgrew how that practice was working for me and I needed to form my own practice. So in my podcasting, the current situation or problem for a long time, for about 10 years, was I felt a calling to reach out to a broader circle or step into the arena. And that would be the next step, the desired outcome. The desired outcome would be that I actually took action to step into the arena and do the podcast. but I had a lot of current thoughts about the situation. So the third part of the transformation tool is our current thoughts. So my thoughts about my current situation in not being a podcaster were all those fear thoughts, like, what if I mess up, or who do I think I am? Who does she think she is? What if people don't like it or say negative things about it? All those things kept me in my stuck current situation of problem, which was not moving forward with doing the work. The next step of the transformation tool is to look at the new thoughts that I want to believe, but I don't quite believe yet. So in my case, I wanted to believe I am a podcaster. I am stepping up into my calling. I am reaching the people that I need to serve with my message, and they deserve to hear this. So Joel Osteen says that whenever you say, I am, whatever follows it is what you're becoming. So the new thoughts are incredibly powerful when you say that you are becoming something, whether you say that for a negative thing or a positive thing, that's where your life will go. So if you're constantly saying, I'm poor, or I'm no good, or I'm a failure, then that is the way that your life will go. But if you say, I am successful, or I am brave, or I am whatever you want to be, if you put those things in that line, that is also where your life will follow. Very, very powerful. So the really critical and key part of this transformation tool is what's called ladder thoughts, and it's in the beginning of the worksheet. You can call them bridging thoughts. It's how we get from the current thoughts of negativity to the new thoughts that you don't quite believe yet. And so in my case, my latter thoughts went like this. I am becoming a person who does podcasts. I am learning to step into the arena. I can practice courage, and I can do hard things. So the last two steps are kind of the sustainability of your new outcome. So the sixth part is, what will I imagine I will be like once the new thoughts are incorporated? This is part of that visioning, like practicing who you actually want to be. And as you practice that, you become that. And then finally, the seventh part is, what does this all look like on a sustained basis? And for me, I'm thinking, well, like, what will this look like in 5 years when I'm a podcaster and I've been able to share my knowledge and wisdom with the people who need to hear this? What will that feel like? What kind of opportunities or circumstances will be in my life at that point? How will I be? So once again, if you go download this worksheet at virtuosacoaching.com/transformation, you can get your own version of the worksheet, and you can insert your own parts to this. You think about what your current situation is where you're feeling stuck or not satisfied with your life, and think about where you want to be. Think about what you have and where you want to go. And then identify some of your current thinking and the things that are keeping you from moving to that next level. And then I want you to put in your new I am thoughts in your new thoughts line, and think about some ladder thoughts, or those transition thoughts that can help bridge from where you currently are to that I am place that really doesn't seem believable quite yet. And then I want you to spend a little time really sitting and thinking with yourself about feeling what that would be like if you were in the new place where you wanted to be and you got what you wanted. What does that look like on a sustained basis? How would you be different? How would your life be different? And who could you reach with your life to help them once you become that person? All right, so what I've shown you today is I've actually shown you what taking a step towards becoming Virtuosa looks like. In doing this show, I've moved from being someone who wants to do a podcast to I am a podcaster. For future episodes, I thought I would start with breaking down the 7 steps of the transformation tool. So next week's podcast is going to be called A Frog in Boiling Water, and it's going to be about step 1 in the transformation tool, which is identifying your current situation or problem that you want to work on. Also, I'm so excited. I have about 30 beautiful, amazing women who have already signed up to do interview podcasts with me. So we're going to be bringing their expertise and their wisdom and their topics to our show. And so some days I might be talking to you and teaching you like this, and some days you might hear me interviewing one of my friends. Super cool. So the result of all of this, the result of us being together and you guys tuning in and listening, is that we are going to learn to manage our brains together so that we can live a happier, healthier life with intention and on purpose. I'm going to teach you how to build a life of abundance and connection that is aligned with your true self, a life that you will truly love. I've got one more little gift for you, And that is, I'm almost always reading something, usually like 4 or 5 books at a time. And like I mentioned earlier in the podcast, my first love was music. That's really important to me. I listen to music and get a lot of inspiration and energy from it. So I thought at the end of every episode, it would be kind of fun for me to share with y'all what I'm reading now and maybe a song that I was listening to or that inspired me or that might inspire you in the next week. And I was thinking that maybe y'all could share these with me too. If y'all go and leave a ratings on the Apple iTunes podcasts, that would be awesome. But in your comments, you can list your favorite books and music that you're listening to, and maybe I will pick some of those up and share them on the show in the future. So what I'm listening to right now in getting ready for this podcast, and y'all, this podcast took me like 4 weeks to get together. The song that I kept playing over and over again is one by Ray LaMontage, Be Here Now. It's just a really peaceful song about being present in the moment, centering yourself. It's a good meditative song, very calming, and always brings me back to the present and gets me out of my head about the future or the past and all that possibility. And then the book that I'm reading right now is one you probably are familiar with, very famous author Joe Dispenza, Breaking the Habit of Being Yourself. He is one of the premier writers about thought work and the transformation of the brain, neuroplasticity, and all of that. Very interesting. And you can find his book on Amazon.com. So I have a challenge for you. I want to challenge you to think about what would your life look like if you became the virtuosa version of yourself. What if you were a virtuosa, the best version of you? And what do you think your first baby step towards that is? Go download that transformation tool at virtuosacoaching.com/transformation and take a look at it and do some thinking on your own. Okay, my virtuosas. That's all I've got today. To celebrate the launch of the show, though, I'm going to be giving away a pair of Virtuosa wireless earbuds. Each week for the first 4 weeks of our podcast, I'm going to be giving away one pair to a lucky listener who subscribes, rates, and reviews the show on Apple Podcasts. It doesn't have to be a 5-star review, although I sure hope you love the show. I want your honest feedback so I can create an awesome show that provides tons of value for you. You can visit virtuosacoaching.com/podcast-launch. That's virtuosacoaching.com/podcast-launch to learn more about the contest and how to enter. You can also take a peek there of a picture of these beautiful AirPods that will encourage you every time you use them that you are on your way to becoming your own virtuosa. I'll be announcing the winners on the show in an upcoming podcast. Okay, my virtuosas, have a wonderful week. Let the becoming begin. Love always, Sue. And I will see you next week in episode 2. See you then.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Becoming Virtuosa. If you want to find out more, come check out virtuosacoaching.com. That's Virtuosa with an A, coaching.com. See you next week.